Hello, and welcome to this week's session on avoiding the cognitive and psychological bias while doing the estimations on the project. So, this can be an important exam topic because, as you might know, both the PMP and ACP exam has a lot of emphasis, focus on the topics around estimation itself. And as a project manager, you should be able to drive effectively the estimation exercise in both agile as well as in a productive or a waterfall style project environment. But there are few things or situations which you should avoid as a project manager to develop the effective estimations for your project, and we will learn few of those concepts and terms in the session today. Not only that, the concepts and terms which we will see in this session are important exam topics, but you should also try to avoid these in your real world projects because they can negatively impact the overall estimation exercise and activity that you are doing in your project. So, let's start with the a brief agenda for today's session. So, this is what I am planning to cover during the session today. We will start with a brief overview of multiple estimation techniques, and we will focus on both the waterfall and the traditional project management estimation technique, along with some of the more popular agile estimation techniques. But please note that this is not a full blown discussion around the estimations. It is just a brief overview of what are some of the existing and some of the more popular estimation techniques which are in use in the project management field. So we'll start with that, and then we will focus on understanding this concept of cognitive and a psychological bias. For some of you, this could be a new term or a new concept, and hence we will cover some of the basics around this. Once we understand the cognitive and the psychological bias, what does it mean and what causes it, and what are some of the negative effects or bad effects of it on the project estimation, we will cover three specific examples of the cognitive bias situations, and those are the bandwagon effect, the hippo, or the groupthink. In the certification exam, you may see a scenario question in which the scenario may have the user may have the use or the application or the play of some of these effects which I mentioned, like a bandwagon effect, hippo, or groupthink. And as a project manager, you should be able to identify such scenario or such situation and then apply the appropriate method to overcome these cognitive and psychological biases. So in our later part of the session, we will cover few of the ways using which you as a project manager uh, can overcome these cognitive and psychological biases. So yeah, this will be the agenda for our session today. Who am I? My name is Ashutosh, and I have more than 16 years of experience in software development work and project management in general. I am both the PMI PMP and PMI ACP certified professional. And after I completed my PMI ACP certification back in 2021, I have created the practice test or mock test for both PMI PMP and PMI ACP exams. These courses are now taken by more than 1,000 aspirants across the globe on the Udemy. So, if you're planning to prepare for the PMP or ACP certification, you may want to check my practice test on these certifications. I will add the link for the same below in the video. With that cover, let's begin with a brief overview of the various estimation techniques commonly used in project management. In this slide, I mentioned some of the most commonly found estimation techniques in both agile as well as predictive or waterfall style project management estimation techniques. In an agile world, the estimations are typically done for the user stories. The user story typically represents the unit of work in an agile methodology such as Scrum, which is easily one of the most popular agile methodologies. Typically, during the sprint planning, the development team assign the story point to each story which they are planning to work in an upcoming sprint. One of the most common ways to assign the story points to individual stories is by using a mathematical term called Fibonacci series. The Fibonacci sequence or a Fibonacci series consists of numbers such as 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on, where each number in the Fibonacci sequence represents a certain number of story points. So, if there is a story with, say, 21 story points, for example, it can be considered as more complex, or it may need more development effort to complete than compared to another story with, say, only 2 or a 3 story point. Okay, another common agile estimation technique which found in agile teams is something called t-shirt sizing. In my experience, the team who is relatively new to agile approach or scrum, they tend to prefer estimations using this t-shirt sizing technique. So instead of spending the time on estimating the story points and applying the Fibonacci series and all of that, the team can simply group the user stories into t-shirt size range such as short, medium, large, and extra large. Some teams may also use another t-shirt sizing called extra large. These sizes are deliberately vague and represent relative sizing rather than the absolute value. So the story which is mentioned as short will be less complex and may be easier and faster to develop than compared to a story which is marked as extra large, for example. It's a straightforward method which does not require precise numerical values. It focuses on relative sizing, helping the team prioritize and plan based on the relative complexity of work rather than trying to predict the exact time or an effort to develop the story. Another popular estimation technique, which is again quite common in agile teams, is called planning poker. It is also known as Scrum Poker, more popularly known in the Scrum framework. Before a planning poker session, right, the agile team, including all the developers, testers, product owners, and Scrum Master, they gather to discuss and understand the user stories or tasks which are to be estimated. These user stories must be well defined and should include all the details in the acceptance criteria, right? After that, each team member is provided with a deck of planning poker cards. These decks consist of cards with numerical value which represent different level of effort. For example, we saw the Fibonacci sequence, right? So the cards may contain the numerical values such as 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on. If the team is using the Fibonacci sequence for story point estimations, or these cards could represent the t-shirt sizes like small, medium, large, and extra large. The team holds a planning poker estimation session, usually moderated by the scrum master or another facilitator, in a physical setting, right? Let's say the team is co-located and they can gather in a physical setting. The team members would just hold up their chosen card simultaneously. But in a virtual team or a remote team, online tools and some of the apps which are now available can be used. After the discussion, each team member privately selects a card which represents their estimate for the user story effort. They do this without revealing their chosen card to the rest of the team. So the team members simultaneously then reveal their selected cards. If there is a consensus among the estimates, that value will be recorded as the estimate for the user story, and the team moves on to the next user story. However, if there is a significant difference in the estimates, then the team discuss their reasoning and any differing perspective. Okay, so this is planning poker. Of course, there are many more agile estimation techniques that can be used than what I have mentioned here, but the goal is obviously not to cover all of them. but just to touch base on few of the more popular ones. Now that we covered the agile estimation technique, let's focus on some of the commonly used estimation techniques in a more predictive style project environment. We will start with something called analogous estimation. Analogous estimation, also called as historical estimation, is a project management technique generally used for estimating the duration or the cost or the effort which is required for a new project work or a task based on some historical data or the characteristics of a similar past project. That is why the name is analogous, because we are trying to estimate a project or the work which is based on some analogy of the past project. Okay, this is analogous estimates. Next, the 3 point estimation technique, again popularly known as PERT, which stands for program evaluation and review technique, is a project management method used to estimate the duration of cost or the resource requirement of a project or an activity. In PERT, generally there will be three estimates that are obtained for each project task or an activity. First one is called optimistic estimate. This estimate represents the best case scenario. It assumes that everything will go exceptionally well with no unexpected issues or delays. Usually, it is denoted by a letter O for optimistic estimates. Second, most likely estimates. This is the estimate which is considered the most realistic or probable under the normal conditions. It reflects the expected scenarios with the typical challenges and uncertainties. This is represented by letter M. And then pessimistic estimates, denoted by letter P. This estimates represents the worst case scenario. It assumes that everything that can go wrong will go wrong, resulting in maximum delays or maximum cost spending. So once all these three estimates, the optimistic, the pessimistic, and most likely estimates, are obtained, PERT uses a weighted average formula to calculate the expected estimate. So I have mentioned here the formula, right? So this is the typical you can say way in which, using 3 point estimations, the estimate can be calculated. The third point here is about the adaptation to the context. So one important takeaway here is, as a project team, you can mix and match the estimations based on the project's need, right? For example, let's say there is a project, and the project on which your team is working on has some part or some areas which are quite similar to the project which has been executed by your organization in the past. And then you can use a technique like analogous estimation to estimate that part of the project, right? And for a part of your project which you are developing from scratch, and the team has not done any such work or similar work in the past, then you can use some of the other techniques that we talked about, such as story point estimation or t-shirt sizing for estimation. So the point here is, the teams can mix and mix these estimation techniques based on the project's requirement. So this is all about the multiple different estimation techniques which can be used in project management. Again, the list can be very big, but the main goal of this session is to you know understand the psychological and cognitive bias, and then we will talk about some of the examples of such psychological and a cognitive bias situations that may show up in the project, and how, as a project manager, you can effectively deal with it. So, moving on, let's first understand what is meant by a cognitive and a psychological bias. Okay, so this psychological and cognitive bias is nothing but a systematic pattern of thinking and a decision making which can deviate from rational or objective reasoning. Now, in other words, we can say that the project team or individuals make the decisions which are not based on the logic or the facts or the data or the evidences. So, as you can imagine, right, if the project team is making the decisions without an emphasis on logics, facts, and data, that means those decisions will most likely contain judgmental errors, and the decision taken under such psychological and cognitive biases usually will be suboptimal decisions which may impact the overall project goals. But you might be wondering why the project team or individuals may make the decisions based on these cognitive or psychological biases, knowing that these can be harmful. Well, there are few well known causes under which the team might be taking such decisions, and I have mentioned some of the causes here. Perhaps one of the most common cause of such cognitive and psychological bias can be homogeneity, and this can be seen in the project which consist of team members composed of similar backgrounds, and then they may have a similar perspective, and maybe they are looking at certain things in a certain way. So, if the project team consists of people with a similar range of experience or age group, or if the project team consists of bulk of the team members coming from a certain college or a university, or have worked in the past together in some previous project, they tend to form this kind of a homogeneity. Such teams are usually more susceptible to the psychological and cognitive bias because they tend to think in a similar manner. Such a homogeneous team usually lacks the diversity of thoughts, and thus making it more challenging to identify and address cognitive biases collectively. Another common reason for the cognitive and psychological bias could be the lack of psychological safety. So, the team that do not foster a psychological safety may discourage the other team members from expressing a different opinions or even admitting to the mistakes. Now, this can lead to the suppression of a diverse viewpoints. In such team which lacks the psychological safety, team members they just tend to not express their own opinions or viewpoints, but instead they simply go by the general consensus without critically examining all the logics and facts and figures, and thus it results in a cognitive bias situation. Time pressure can also be a factor on why the team may show a cognitive bias. So sometimes when the team are under time constraint, they may rely on some mental shortcuts or heuristics to speed up the decision making. One typical example that comes to mind is in a real world project, right? There could be, let's say, a senior stakeholder who asks the team to come up with the estimation for this new feature in a day or two, right? So instead of team spending good amount of time understanding the feature in detail, the team may be tempted to reply quickly under time pressure to this stakeholder by using some historical data or figures to come up with the estimation. So instead of doing the thorough investigation of the feature in detail, the team is not spending that time here on doing the sufficient analysis because of the time pressure, and this is not always desirable, and the team may come up with the incorrect estimations, and that will set the incorrect expectations in future. So these shortcuts can introduce cognitive biases, because often under time pressure we tend to ignore the logic, ignore the facts and figures, and critically examining the multiple factors. So now that we understand the meaning of psychological and cognitive bias, what can cause it, such situations in a project context, and what are some of the negative effects, let's understand a few specific examples of such cognitive bias in our next slide. So, in this slide, you will see three prime examples of commonly seen patterns or scenarios or situations of a cognitive bias, especially in a project context. The first term is called the bandwagon effect. This bandwagon effect is a cognitive bias and a social phenomena that can influence estimation and decision making in various contexts, including project management and estimations of the project. It generally occurs when people tend to adopt certain beliefs or behaviors because they perceive that others are doing the same, rather than making an independent judgment based on evidences and information. So, in the context of estimation, the bandwagon effect can manifest in many ways. right? For example, let's imagine a scenario where the project team is doing a sprint planning and the team members are working on the estimation of the user stories. The facilitator has asked for the opinions or the viewpoints of individual team members and asked them to estimate each user story using story points. In the bandwagon effect, the team members may conform to the estimation provided by others simply because those estimations seems to be widely accepted or because a prominent team members endorses them. Now, this can lead to the estimations that are overly optimistic or overly pessimistic if the consensus is not grounded in a reality, right? So the bandwagon effect can create a social pressure for the individual to kind of conform to the prevailing group opinion, even if they have reservations about the accuracy of the estimation itself. So this pressure can stifle the critical thinking and independent judgment, right? So this is what the bandwagon effect is. Next is a hippo scenario. In the context of decision making, hippo is nothing but an acronym which stands for highest paid person's opinion or highest paid person's perspective. It refers to the phenomena where the opinions or the decisions of the most senior or most influential person in a group, such as let's say a tech lead or a senior solution architect, carries the highest weightage or the most weight, often to detriment of other viewpoints or more data driven approaches. So again, you can imagine a project scenario where if the senior solution architect says that a story point for a user story is 13, right? For example, it's very difficult now for a junior team member to kind of propose a two story point or a three story point estimation for this story, because he or she knows that it will go against the proposed story point by the senior most member of the team, although it might be completely possible that the junior team member in this case might be more accurate or correct in terms of estimation. But due to this hippo effect, the opinion or the decision of the most senior or an influential person may tend to override the views or the viewpoints of the other team members, especially the junior team members. Again, not a desirable situation on the project. Another common scenario is a thing called groupthink. As the name suggests, it is a psychological phenomena which occurs within a group of people. This groupthink occurs within a group of people when the desire for harmony or conformity within the group results in an irrational or a dysfunctional decision making outcome. It is generally characterized by a tendency to minimize the conflict and reach a consensus decision without critically examining or evaluating the alternatives or considering the diverse viewpoints, right? So the group members just feels the pressure to agree with the majority opinion even if they disagree with it. So groupthink can lead to a poor decisions, particularly in a situation where the creativity, independent thinking, and a thorough examination of options is essential, right? So the project team members, instead of focusing on coming up with the accurate estimation based on the real facts and data, they are ignoring that, but they tend to focus on the group harmony and consensus, and this is in most situation can lead to a poor decision making, right? So now that we understood what is the cognitive bias and what are some of the situations in the project context that you may see in a real life project, it is important to understand how as a project manager you can overcome these situations and help team avoid these cognitive and psychological biases. We will see some of the ways of how to overcome these in our next slide. One of the simplest ways of overcoming these kind of cognitive and psychological biases is by using something called anonymous estimation technique. You guys might have heard about the term called wideband Delphi estimation technique, right? The wideband Delphi estimation technique is an example of anonymous estimations. In this wideband Delphi technique, the project team members submit their estimations in an anonymous way or anonymously. Because of such anonymous estimations, the team members will not be influenced by other senior members, and in this way scenarios like the hippo effect can be easily avoided. The second method to overcome the psychological and cognitive bias is by encouraging independent thinking within the team members. In agile literature, I'm sure you must have heard about creating a culture of open and a safe environment. You can basically apply that characteristic here. So you can create a culture of openness and safety and independent thinking, in which any team member, be it a junior member or be it a senior most team member within the team, can express their views and opinions, including their opinions regarding the estimation, in an independent fashion without any fear of judgment or being biased. So we talked about some of the negative effects of a homogeneous team, which basically means the team that consists of members coming from certain sections, such as similar age group or people coming from similar background. This kind of homogeneous team may be under the influence of cognitive bias. So instead of forming an homogeneous team, you can alternatively build a more diverse and a more inclusive project team for your project, if possible. So you should include the team members with diverse background, diverse experience, and a different perspective. This kind of diversity in your project team members can help counterbalance the influence of single individual or a viewpoint of a specific group. So, these are some of the common ways by using which a project manager can overcome the negative effects of cognitive and a psychological bias, which can help them make more accurate project estimations. So, I hope the information which is shared in this session was helpful for you to understand the concept of cognitive and psychological bias and how it can be harmful to your project and its delivery. We also saw some of the terms and example scenarios, such as the bandwagon effect, the hippo effect, or a group think, and how as a project manager you can overcome some of these negative effects of these cognitive and psychological bias situations. So if you find this session useful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to this channel. I am planning to add more videos related to the PMI ACP and PMI PMP certification related topics in future. So if you have any specific topics which you want more information around, do let me know and I will try to make a video on that. If you have any questions or feedbacks or comments, please feel free to reach out, and I thank you for watching this session.